In the finale of Simba's Pride, Kovu returns to the Pride Lands not as an exile but as an ally. Simba accepts it, and Vitani, Zira's daughter and loyal exile commander, is the first to drop her weapon. She is followed by the others. Victory has been achieved. The conflict is over. Light triumphs over darkness. But a scene passes, and most of the exiles disappear from the plot. It's like they're evaporating. Kovu stays, Vitani stays, but where's everyone else? Why don't we see them on the Rock of the Ancestors anymore? Why aren't they next to Simba and Nala in the symbolic scenes of the future kingdom? What happened to those who just moments ago made the decision to go home? Therein lies the paradox. In the logic of the classic Disney finale, justice must restore not only balance but also social harmony. Evil retreats, good unites, but in practice we do not see this unification. Those who were exiled are formally forgiven, but remain outside the picture. In fact, outside the new world. We can assume that this is just a plot simplification, that the scriptwriters simply did not develop the theme of the further fate of the exiles. But it is in these voids that the most interesting questions lie. After all, if we assume that the events of Simba's Pride are an allegory of social conflict, then it is logical to ask, why has society not reintegrated those it once expelled? And this is where the hypotheses begin. Were the exiles really ready to return to the Pride Lands? Did the Pride itself want them? And most importantly, could this return? There are at least 3 possible post-climax scenarios. Integration. The exiles did become part of the Pride, but later left voluntarily, disillusioned or unable to find a place for themselves. Self-isolation. They chose not to return after realizing that their presence would cause tension or be seen as a threat. Formal forgiveness but actual alienation. Pride Lands forgave but did not accept. Conditional amnesty without real equality. In any of these scenarios, the result is the same. No visible unification. There is victory but no peace. Symbolically, the conflict is closed, but socially it has left cracks. This breaks down the fairy tale construction and opens up room for analysis. The problem is that in terms of political and social logic, accepting one character, Kovu, is not equivalent to public amnesty. Even if Simba says welcome, it doesn't mean that the entire Pride accepts strangers with an open heart. And it certainly doesn't mean that the exiles themselves are willing to return to the community that once rejected them. We are dealing not just with a conflict of leaders, but with a deep-rooted social divide. The scar, Zira, exile, ideological enmity, all these have left traces, and perhaps deeper than it seems at first glance. Consequently, to understand why the return did not happen, we need to look not at the final scene, but at the Pride Lands and the psychology of the exiles themselves. What kind of society is this? How does it perceive the outsiders? And were the exiles able to give up their identity for peace? At first glance, Pride Lands looks like a harmonious kingdom. Nature is in balance, food chains are respected, all animals live in symbiosis. But behind this idyllic picture hides a strict hierarchical structure based on authority, tradition, and subordination. The monarch is at the head, his word is law. Loyalty is the basis of social stability. Breaking this hierarchy is a challenge not only to the king, but to the entire system. When Zira and her followers were expelled, it was an act of political cleansing. After Scar's death, Simba didn't just reclaim his throne, he drew a line between his own and outsiders. Those who disobeyed were excluded. Formally, for loyalty to the usurper, in fact, for ideological disagreement. The exiles thus became symbols of betrayal and threat. This is how the Pride Lands remembered them. The collective memory of society does not work on the principle of justice, but on the principle of simplification. The loyal one is a hero. The disloyal is an enemy. Yes, Zira was aggressive, bigoted, and manipulative, but all exiles? Does everyone deserve an exception? I don't think so. But public perception does not distinguish between shades. The exiles became a unified image of the stranger, and this image became entrenched at the level of fear. And here is an important question. Even if Simba forgave, who forgave along with him? Society is afraid of change, especially after trauma. And Scar's reign was precisely the trauma. Hunger, devastation, fear. Any association with it is disturbing. The return of the exiles is not just the arrival of new lions. It's a reminder of the past that everyone wanted to get rid of. Even if Kovu has changed, even if Vitani has betrayed Zira, the very fact of their kinship with Scar and ties to the exiles doesn't disappear. It's a stigma. You can draw a parallel with any real society after a civil conflict. Even when there is formal peace, reintegration is always difficult, because trust is not a command, but a process. It takes time, dialogue, and effort on both sides. We see none of this in Simba's Pride. There is an act of forgiveness, but no mechanism for reconciliation, which means that Pride society remains closed. This explains why even after the victory, the exiles might not feel welcome. Even with formal permission to live in the Pride Lands, they would likely have faced alienation, distrust, and second-class status. Who would listen to them? Who would trust them to hunt, patrol, raise cubs? Probably no one. It's important to note here, Pride Lands is not a democracy. It is a monarchy where the will of the king is the supreme law. But even the wisest leader cannot change public consciousness with one decision. Simba could have ordered the acceptance of the exiles, but acceptance doesn't mean inclusion, doesn't mean forgive, and certainly not to forget. This is the second part of the paradox. Even if the exiles wanted to return, the Pride Lands were not ready to receive them. Now it is time to ask the next question. Were the exiles themselves ready to return? Were they inwardly willing to be forgiven? Or would it mean for them the loss of their own identity? Let us imagine the exiles not as an abstract group, but as a community with its own history, culture, and psychology. These aren't just lions who were kicked out of Pride Lands. This is a generation that has grown up in isolation, hostility, and a cult of resistance. Zira's ideology was not just a thirst for revenge, it became the basis of collective identity. For these lions, Scar was not a usurper, but a legitimate king. The memory of this has been cultivated as a truth superseded by official history. And when Zira spoke of revenge, she was broadcasting not only personal pain, but collective resentment. They have been cast out, so they have been betrayed. They were rejected, so they were not obliged to obey. This is how a parallel system of values was formed. This is a crucial point. The exiles didn't just live separately. They formed an alternative culture. In it, Simba is the enemy. The hero is Scar. The ideal is struggle. When in the climactic scene Vitani throws the spear and gives up the conflict, it looks like liberation. But liberation from what? From revenge? Or from her own? For Vitani, it may be a step towards a new life. But for others, it is the destruction of the world in which they live. Social trauma is not always a tragedy in the usual sense. Sometimes it is a habit of pain. And returning to the Pride Lands could mean not forgiveness, but surrender. Not a new chance, but an abandonment of themselves. Besides, with Zira dead, the community had lost its center. It held not on love but on fear and ideological discipline. The leader is gone. The structure has disintegrated. The exiles have no unifying factor or common path. The ideology collapsed and no one offered an alternative to it. Kovu did not become the new leader for them. He went to Pride Lands and became part of the system they were fighting against. From their point of view, a traitor. Vitani, though she remained, was a military commander, but not a charismatic ideologue. She could lead a troop, but not a nation. Here it is worth introducing the concept of the camp syndrome. In psychology, it is a condition in which a person is unable to adapt to normal life after a long period of isolation or conflict. Even if there is a chance to return, he fears, rejects, or does not understand this chance. Because life on the outside is more frightening than that's what would happen to most exiles. Without Zira, without a clear purpose, without support within the Pride Lands, they were nowhere. And in that nowhere made a tacit decision not to return, not because someone stopped them. And because going back is no longer a choice, it's become impossible. Thus, we get a mirror image of the second part of the scenario. Not only were the Pride Lands not ready to receive them, they themselves were not ready to return. And this brings us to a key question. Could leaders like Kovu and Vitani have changed the course of events? Or were they not initially the right figures to turn a symbolic victory into real reform? After Zira's death and the end of the conflict, it would be logical to expect a new era. Kovu is a symbol of reconciliation, a lion who has rejected Scar's ideology and proved his loyalty by deed. Vitani is the one who first gave up the fight and stood by Pride. It would seem that we have new leaders in front of us, a bridge between the two camps. But it didn't happen. Why? Because Kovu and Vitani are not reformers. They became symbols but not systemic players. And that's a fundamental difference. Consider Kovu. His journey is a classic story of moving from darkness to light, but he remains an object all the time. First a tool in the hands of Zira, then the target of Simba's suspicions, then Kiara's favor. It is only in the very finale that he makes the conscious choice to abandon the mission for which he was raised. It's a personal victory, but not a political one. Kovu didn't initiate the reform. He did not propose a reintegration plan. He did not create a dialogue between Pride and the exiles. Not even symbolically. He does not speak for his former community. He dissolves into the Pride Land system. And therein lies his limitation as a leader. His story ended in personal salvation but not in transformation of the world. Vitani is a more interesting case. She stays with Pride and in Brave 8, the Lion Guard series, she even becomes the leader of the Lioness Protectors after Kiara. But at the time of Simba's pride, she's a fighter, not a politician. Her choice to refuse to attack is an act of moral strength, but not a strategy. She doesn't offer the exiles a path of return. She simply says, enough is enough. It was conceivable that she could have been the leader of a new community, one that connected the exiles and the pride. But she didn't have the resources to do so. No institutional support, no authority within the pride, not even full-fledged trust. Vitani's loyalty could be perceived as questionable, yesterday's enemy taking the side of the victor. Those are not liked on either side of the barricades. Thus, both characters, Kovu and Vitani, found themselves in the role of bridges that no one walked across. Their intentions were good, their choices were honorable. But they did not become the ones capable of building a new system. This is the problem with many happy endings. Symbolic victory substitutes for real change. The prince embraces the princess, and it is believed that the people have embraced the people. But it doesn't work that way in life. Victory is only the first step. What comes next is dialogue, reform, acceptance, working with memory and pain. That didn't happen at Prideland. And so symbols remain symbols. Victory was victory, but the structure remained the same. The exiles are still outside it, and the final question sounds clearer and clearer. Did these two camps have even the slightest chance to really unite? Kovu's victory, the formal pardon, Vitani's gesture, and the reunion with Pride all look like the finale of a fairy tale. But if you take away the music and symbolism, you are left with a complex, ambiguous social situation. Neither side of the conflict was ready for real unification. And perhaps that is the main truth of this story. The Pridelands retained power, structure, and the memory of betrayal. Exiles their pride, pain, and inner detachment. Kovu and the Vitani were caught between two worlds. They had betrayed neither, but neither had succeeded in bringing them together. Or maybe they didn't even try, because they knew the resistance would be too strong, and no matter what they did, the crack had already become part of the foundation. Sometimes peace is only possible through separation, not hostile but conscious. A situation in which two groups recognize, we can't live together, but we won't fight anymore either. This is not reconciliation in the classical sense. It is a fragile coexistence. That was most likely the outcome of the conflict between the Pride and the exiles. Those who wanted to stay, stayed. Those who could not, left. There was no chase, no retribution, but there was no joy of reunion. Just a pause, silence, and a new chapter, written by other characters. Was it possible to change things? Theoretically, yes. If Pride had taken the initiative to create the conditions for a return. Had Kovu used his position not only for personal salvation, but also for reform. If the exiles could overcome their inner fear and pain, but it's all if. In practice, however, it is not always the truth that wins, but the model that is simpler and safe. It's easier not to change, it's safer not to let in, and more stable. Leave everything as it is, under the beautiful flag of peace. So the tale ends on a high note, but there is a disturbing message between the lines. The conflict is over, but the division remains. And maybe the most accurate conclusion here is not the question, why didn't they come back? But the admission, they shouldn't have come back, because they weren't ready for it. Neither were they, nor those who once drove them out.